All right, guys, we got another one here. This one is called The Death of Mini Consoles. Let's check this one out.
I think one of the most interesting parts of retro gaming in recent times, when I say recent times, but we're really going back around 10 years ago now or so, is the rise of the mini console craze and the subsequent demise of the mini console craze around 2020 or 2021. Nintendo came out of nowhere and released the NES Classic at the tail end of the Wii U's demise, and it was really a genius idea. Now, I will say that Nintendo was not the first company to come up with mini consoles. It's been done before by companies such as Jack's Pacific, but the NES Classic was a genius idea by Nintendo. It was a shrunk down NES with two controllers with 30 built in games. It was very, very successful. Nintendo produced and sold around 2.3 million NES Classic editions from launch through to April of 2017 alone, with shipments selling out immediately. And I remember back in the day, man, there were so many unhappy people that were not able to get an NES Classic, and there were a lot of scalpers on eBay selling them for like 3, even 4 times as much as what they were worth, which at the time was, I believe it was $59.99. $60 for an NES Classic with 30 games. That is incredible value for money. It's something that, if you think about in these days, 2026, it's unheard of that you could get that much value with just $60, because even AAA games, full price games, don't cost that much anymore.
I mean, it also, and it also basically mattered how savvy you were because, yeah, back then, at that time, uh, it was pretty decent, and nostalgia purposes was a big part of why those things sold like hotcakes. And looking at it now, back now, I mean, there's so many devices currently that you could go to that are budget friendly as well, like the Retroid Pockets and the likes of those, where you can. I mean, I bought that. I think the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, and I think when I bought it was like 125 bucks. And I mean, I have Dreamcast, I have Sega Saturn games on there, PlayStation One, some PlayStation Two games, all these Nintendo games, DS. Like it's crazy. And so the value you get for that is ridiculous. And you can hook it up to a monitor if you want to. You can hook a Bluetooth controller up. You can play with a PlayStation controller or whatever. So these things are really, really accessible, and you can do a lot for the price tag. And I would have definitely went. That's why I went in those directions at that time. But yeah, I could definitely see the appeal of these boxes.
Now, the NES Classic sold out almost immediately, and Nintendo, I think is fair to say, they did not see the demand for these coming, and there were so many scalpers on eBay just reselling these. I was able to get an NES Classic, as you can see behind me here. I was very, very lucky to get one when they were made available at Target on their website, and I also ordered one, a Famicom Mini from, I think it was Play Asia or one of the
That's
overseas
dope.
sellers as well. But I got to admit, I was kind of caught up in the hype and the FOMO of these mini consoles. And even though I have both the NES Classic and the Famicom Mini, I got to be honest with you guys, I don't think I played a single game for more than like 5 minutes on either of these systems. Really, I just got them for making video content. And right now, they're just kind of mostly collectibles. And even now, when I have these like sitting here behind me, I can't think of a single time when I really sat down and played either of those systems. So it is interesting that I kind of got caught up in the hype, and as well as many others at the time.
Yeah.
The NES Classic was just a cheap ARM-based SoC that ran Linux. It was quickly hacked and allowed for people to put hundreds of games on them, and
Hmm.
it even allowed you to install other emulator cores, which is cool, right? Like, I think as someone that loves open source and freedom, to do whatever you want with the hardware that you own, hacking these systems is really cool. And while it sold millions, Nintendo was criticized for the limited availability of the product. Now, in 2017, Nintendo said it was ceasing development of the NES Classic, which really met with a lot of confusion, but also speculation that the Super NES Classic was coming, which indeed it did. If you recall, towards the end of 2017, I believe it released at the end of
Yeah.
September or maybe the start of October 2017. And this was essentially a follow-up to the NES Classic, but this time around it had 21 games. Given the price of many Super Nintendo games, having a system like this, a Super NES Mini or a Super NES Classic, that again had 21 games built in, that only cost, I think it was $79.99. It was a little bit more expensive than the NES Classic.
Yeah, that was a little too much for my fancy. I'm just going to keep it real. Okay. For that many games, for that amount of games, nah. And I could have sworn this stuff came out later than that, but maybe, it's 2017. Yeah, that was a minute ago. Almost 10 years ago, man. It's crazy.
Classic. And what made it even cooler, it came with the unreleased Star Fox 2, which made interest to hardcore Nintendo fans at an absolute peak. Now, I do admit at the time, I did play my Super NES Classic quite a bit. It was a fun diversion from console gaming at the time. I loved the ease of use. I loved the fact that it had very high quality emulation. And Star Fox 2 obviously was the icing on the cake. Now, the Super NES Classic ended up selling around 5 million units at the end of 2018. And it's said that both the NES and Super NES Classic sold a total of over 10 million units. This is massive. So for me, the Super NES Classic really was the peak of the mini console craze. It didn't get any bigger than this, although there was still some big things to come. I think the whole market really kind of topped out with the Super NES Classic. It was massive for the time, and it was really just a system that kind of complemented the Nintendo Switch. But the good times would not last, and this was not necessarily Nintendo's fault, more so from Sony PlayStation, because Sony PlayStation decided to throw their hat into the ring, just like many other companies at the time. Sony released the PlayStation Classic in December of 2018, just in time for the holidays. And this was a emulation box just like the NES and Super NES Classic. But Sony also got a lot of criticism for using an open source emulation solution for their PlayStation Classic and not resorting to something that they had built in internally. And we do know that Sony had solutions for running PlayStation games internally, but also the system came bundled with 20 PlayStation games. Now, on paper, that sounds like a mouth-watering prospect, right? We got games such as Tekken 3, Resident Evil Director's Cut, and some other choice games, but these were all PAL versions, and they all ran at 50 Hz. So games such as Tekken 3 ran famously slower on the PlayStation Classic than it does on original hardware.
Yeah.
And there was also various omissions. There was no scanline filters, no shaders, there was no aspect ratio settings, but Sony really famously dropped the ball on the PlayStation Classic. And to kind of make matters worse for them, the scene kind of stepped in and hacked the PlayStation Classic in a matter of weeks. And it was possible to basically just set up your own games on the PlayStation Classic and do it that way. There was various open source, hacks such as, I think it was like Project Eris and Bleem Sync and LolHack.
I mean, you gotta love open source stuff, man, as a gamer. It's helped me tremendously with one of my all-time favorite games on my Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, which is All Pro Virtual Wrestling 2, which is basically the equivalent to something like a No Mercy on a Nintendo 64. I love that AKI engine, or Aki engine, some people call it. But yeah, that game was Japanese only, and I love the game, but going through all of the menus and stuff was a pain in the ass, guys. So being an open source that it was, there was people that actually go in there and basically give us a English version. They were able to translate it. So it made the game much more playable and easy to navigate. I could create my wrestlers and everything like that in that game. Love that game. Love all of the AKI engine games over there. No Mercy. You have WrestleMania 2000 over there. So those are my bread and butter games to play on my handheld, guys, period.
Various ways to run other PlayStation games on the PlayStation Classic, and of course, the ability to run different emulation cores as well. Now, Sega would also release a mini console in the form of the Sega Genesis Mini in 2019, and from an emulation standpoint, it was superb. This was because M2 was involved in the development of the software and the emulation for the product. Now, the system retailed for $79.99, but this time came with 40 titles with the inclusion of bonus games that were never originally released for the original Genesis or Mega Drive hardware. And for me, the Genesis Mini and the follow-up, the Genesis Mini 2, were technically the best mini consoles that you could get. But a few things were apparent by now. The Genesis Mini 2 featured over 50 games and even included Sega CD titles, again for $79.99. But by now, the market for mini consoles was shifting. In some ways, offering 50 games dilutes the value of each individual title. In addition, Sega had already released the Sega Genesis Classics that were available on most console and PC platforms, so many of these games were already available to people. So what ended up killing off the mini console craze? I think there's a couple of different reasons, and I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say on this, but first for me, I think Nintendo Switch Online, when it launched in September of 2018, it started out with a rolling list of NES games and then Super NES games. And then later on, we added things like Genesis, Game Boy Advance, N64. But once you've got an active subscription and you're kind of invested in the Nintendo Switch ecosystem on a console that you already own, then the entire idea of the NES and Super NES Classics kind of just evaporates, right? Like, what is the point of plugging in another box into your TV when you can play literally the same games on your Nintendo Switch and take that with you anywhere you like?
I mean, that's where you kind of have, a fork in the road, because not everybody feels that like that. Like me personally, I just mentioned that. So a lot of these games they're not going to have or bring back because of license problems or issues. Like the wrestling games, they're not going to bring those games back because you would have to license all of that to bring those games back. That's why you never see games like the sports games come back, or the wrestling games or anything like that come back, because they're too much money. They can't. They wouldn't be able to afford it, and nobody wants to jump through those hoops. So that's for me. That's why I kind of enjoy a lot of these games on my choice of machinery, and you're not going to get that with these Nintendo or these Sega Genesis consoles that are coming out. And with those games anyway, like he said too, you could get those games, you could find all of those games easily, and pretty much the whole library. And you could put them on your phone, you could put them on any device you really wanted to. So, it just depends on what kind of gamer you are. If you're, a nostalgic type of gamer and you like, the systems, the console, the actual consoles themselves, having a mini version of that around, sitting around the house somewhere would be kind of cool, right? It just depends on what you were, who you were.
Right. And I think this is one of the reasons why Nintendo decided to discontinue or quickly discontinue both the NES and Super NES Classic, because they really felt like the NSO service was the main service to, serve up these old retro games.
Let me just interject, I never liked the Nintendo's version of what they're doing, because number one, you don't get every game that you want. You're at the discretion of what they choose for you, and you also have to be online to play these. So you can't just buy these like, oh, I really liked this game, or I liked that game a lot. You can't just buy that game and just own that game. They want you in their ecosystem. They want you online. They want you on the hook for that monthly note for that service. That's what they want from you. So I'm not really about that. I want to play what I want to play and when I want to play it and how I want to play it. As a gamer, especially somebody at my age who has been there for the Nintendo, for the OG. I remember for Christmas as a kid getting Game Boys, the first Game Boys. Like I have all of these guys. I've experienced all of these all the way now to where we are as a culture in the gaming scene. And it's changed a lot. And there's some things that I like to keep, and there's some things that, I don't. And that's the beauty of being able to play everything.
We've got also things like the Game Gear Micro, which released in 2020, which, while this was a really cute little idea, Sega ended up splitting 4 separate console SKUs, or these mini console SKUs, with 4 games each into a small screen that you couldn't even see, and you were kind of playing for a few minutes, but it wasn't even really worth the trouble, right? You had a lot of eye strain. It was more of a joke than anything else, but it also kind of signaled, I think, to the wider industry that anyone that was kind of thinking about getting into this space, the mini console space, had to really stop taking this seriously, because it felt like Sega was kind of at the end of, coming up with these mini consoles. The Game Gear Micro for me kind of represented the end of that craze as we know it. I think the enthusiast market as well also had a determining factor in this, because the enthusiast market had moved on. We're talking about companies such as Analog that ship things like the Mega SG, as well as the Mr. FPGA, that really kind of has matured into a genuinely capable platform that does cycle accurate FPGA recreations of dozens of arcade systems, arcade boards, and home consoles. But there's also the handheld market that's also exploded. You've got the Ambinix, the AYNs, the Retroids, the GPD Wins. Suddenly, that represents better value for money than, say, the price of a Super NES Classic. So the mini console craze suddenly went from the darling of the video game industry, selling millions and millions, just being snapped up everywhere, selling out everywhere, to kind of the worst option in almost every direction in just a few years, right? It's less convenient than the Nintendo Switch Online service, or, you know, playing retro games on like AntStream, for example, on your Xbox. It's less accurate than the Mister or an analog product. It's less flexible than a cheaper handheld device. And the technical case for it just collapsed. It ended up just being something cool for collectors. And it's one of the reasons why I don't really play my mini consoles. And I think a lot of us out there that did get into that moment where we ended up buying up these products, we don't really use them either anymore.
I mean, and that's why, you know, most people don't, because there's just too many options, better options at that as well. And you can take them on the go. You don't have to hook this up there. Like, how would you play that box if you were going on a trip, right? Unless you had to get to the hotel first and then hook it up. No. What if you wanted to play it now? Okay, you want to play some Alter Beast right now while you're on the plane, right? You can do that now with these devices. A lot of them, like I said, on your phone. They make special controllers that you can just put on your phone, put your phone in, and you can play them like that. So the sky is the limit now with the options that we have. And I think that's what pretty much killed these things, unless you wanted them for nostalgia purposes or collector's purposes, right? So it is what it is. You know, I can't believe it was like 2016, 2017 when these were coming out. But time flies, man. And with that, I'm going to get out of here. I want to thank everybody for watching the content. If you did enjoy it, consider hitting the like and subscribe button, guys. I drop content on this channel multiple times a week. There's a podcast every Wednesday, and there's the podcast on Monday. You can catch anywhere podcasts are heard or listened to, so you can go check it out there. And with that being said, guys, I will see you in the next video.